Police officers of Reddit, what was your oh shit moment? Part 2. Story 1. Nothing makes you go oh shit more than stopping an obvious drunk, feeling like you could be stopping a homicide in progress, to realizing you know the person. Maybe you know them really well. Story 2. My husband has been a police officer for over 20 years. One night he was patrolling the downtown area when he noticed a purse someone had left behind. He opened the bag to check for ID and found a turd. Some lady took a big-ass shit in her handbag and left it behind. He'll talk about autopsies and burnt bodies, but that is one story he would rather forget. Story 3. My dad was a cop for about 19 years before what would be the first time he called me after a shift because he felt like out of my family, I would be the only one would just listen. He got a call about a possible domestic violence out in the next county, and he was the closest unit. Short story. Crazy-ass dad locked himself in the bathroom with his 7 and 3-year-old sons, shot and killed both sons before killing himself. My dad got out of his car at the second shot and barely made it into the house at the third. He requested a transfer the next week. Story 4. Not me, but my brother-in-law. He gets a call that there's been an accident at a dark intersection where a lot of people speed through. Arrives and finds he's the first responder and it's a really bad collision. Finds a 6-month-old infant thrown 20 plus feet from the car. Mother is dead. He gives CPR to the baby, but the injuries are too damaging. The baby dies in his arms. Till today, he insists on car seats, boosters for kids until they're big enough. I don't think he's ever gotten over that baby dying. Story 5. Had a call come out as a crash without injuries. Rolled up to the call with my partner, myself, and another unit. The guy had crashed into his own front yard, but there was no property damage. When I tried to get the guy to sign a crash statement, he told me he didn't want to and that he hadn't slept for 10 days. Then he told my partner that he had just gotten out of the hospital after an evaluation. It was cold outside, so we let him sit in the back of my buddy's cruiser while he filled out the statement of what happened. He kept making statements like, "Just kill me, man," and "Guys, just blow my head off right here." My partner called the hospital to make sure he didn't escape or something, and the guy wasn't going to receive a citation at all since it was his own property that got damaged. Just a tow to his driveway, which was right there, and that's all. While walking back to the back of the cruiser to let him out, the guy pushed open the door when my partner opened it and yelled, "Let's go, mother duckers," before attempting to tackle my partner. All three of us jumped on top of him and began trying to hold him down while he kept screaming. He then reached up and bit my partner on the arm. We got him in cuffs, then transported him to the hospital, where we had to fight him 2 more times in the hospital, and he bit a nurse. Everyone was okay, and it ended up being that he was just mentally unstable. No drugs involved. Story 6. A law prof in Australia spent 20 years as a cop before becoming a lawyer and eventually teaching. In explaining the battered wife syndrome defense to murder, he told a story of a call to a little old lady's house where she had said on the phone that she had killed her husband. Before this incident, he didn't really understand why it existed. Why doesn't the woman just leave? Why doesn't she just go to someone else's house? Prof shows up to the door and is greeted by a little old lady saying, "Come in, would you like some tea?" He goes in and she starts putting some cakes on a tray and pouring tea. He wonders if she's all there. He asked, "So you said that you killed your husband on the phone. Would I be able to see him?" She directs him to the living room where the old man was on a lazy boy chair, bottle in hand, and a tomahawk in his skull. Meanwhile, old lady is asking if he takes sugar or milk in his tea. The prof said at this moment he realized why the defense of battered wife existed. The drunk old guy had been beating her for years, controlled all the money, and didn't let her have friends. She had nowhere to go even if she left him. So on this day, after saying he was going to beat her if his sports team lost, she took matters into her own hands. He said this was the moment he realized that sometimes there are situations where life doesn't make sense and people take the only way they can see. Reply 1. God damn. What happened to the old lady? Original poster. She was arrested and booked, but got no conviction, as the defense was a complete defense at the time. Story 7. We were looking for a guy who stole guns from his ex and found him under a pile of clothes in a closet at a different house. Unfortunately, there was like 7 kids sleeping in the same room, so I start getting them out of there while my partner cuffs the guy who is pretending to sleep. We decide to drag him out, and I go to move the mattress to get it out of the way, and we find the stolen guns under where the kids were sleeping. Reply 1. Had one of those with a baby sleeping under bags of meth. The daycare discovered it because, oopsie, mom left the baby carrier at daycare when she dropped off the baby. Reply 2. I have a family friend who dated an absolute loser. He knocked her up at 15, and she moved into an apartment with him. The apartment was raided, and he hid meth under the baby. Needless to say, they lost custody. Story 8. A girl that wanted to unalive herself was dropped off at the hospital. Myself and my colleague were there escorting another prisoner from custody. This girl came and spoke to our prisoner. They'd never before, but they were just making idle hospital waiting room chit-chat. The girl vanishes, not bothered. We don't know why she's there. Who she is, we just assume she'd gone somewhere else. After a while, our prisoner says, "That girl has been in the toilet a long time. Perhaps she's having a big poo?" We laugh and then realize it had been a while. So I start banging the door. No answer. Door locked. I unscrew the lock and she sat there, wheezing and not super responsive. My colleague goes for help and a nurse comes and unzips her jacket and she's made a ligature from a sock and she's blue and not breathing. I managed to cut it off. It was on tight. We couldn't get scissors in to cut it. And she's taken through to get checked. Now breathing again. My partner goes with her. I'm stood by the door with my prisoner getting air. The whole thing is stressful. This happened in the middle of a busy A&E. ER for you Yanks. People are just looking at me. Next thing I know, a healthcare assistant is running out to me because this girl is now becoming violent and my partner needs help. I can't leave my prisoner and I can't leave my partner to get beat up. I chose to go for my partner. This girl is smashing her head into a wall, kicking, hitting, and trying to bite. It took 3 of us to get her calm. I barely managed to get the assistant shout out before going in. Radio signal is poor to non-existent. Luckily, the prisoner sat patiently in the waiting room whilst we dealt with that. They weren't cuffed, so they could have ran and there was nothing we could do to stop it. On top of all the stress that day caused, I didn't really have the oh shit moment until I was in my car on the way home and I realized a girl nearly died 5 feet away from me. I wouldn't gave known if it wasn't for the prisoner paying attention to where their new friend went. Reply 1. Did that affect the prisoner positively? He inadvertently saved her life and didn't flee when given the chance. Seems deserving. Reply 2. I think they were keen to see a doctor having coughed up blood. Story 9. Late to the party, but I will say not a cop, but the victim who got to watch. I was a truck driver in my former life. Was involved in an unalive incident by truck incident where a guy killed himself and his son. After a couple hours, I was unhurt physically. I was in the back of a cruiser giving my statement. The MTO, DOT for my American neighbors, rolled up at the time and got out and started taking pics of my 18-wheeler and started to do a truck inspection. The cop I was dealing with got out of his cruiser and proceeded to tear that inspector a new asshole. Basically, get the hell out of my crime scene. I thanked the cop and said he didn't know if he could actually do that, but no way was he letting DOT charge me with anything. Story 10. Was doing a welfare check at a house for a guy that wanted to unalive himself. Only person living at the house, car and driveway, and house was locked up. Gathered some more info and was told where a key was. Opened the door, announced myself, and started searching the house, expecting to find a dead body. Opened a closet door, and the guy was hiding in there with a rifle next to him. If he wanted me dead, I wouldn't be typing this. Dude was having some issues. Sat and talked for about half an hour. Told me he heard me, but didn't want to talk to anyone. Got him the help he needed. Story 11. Dad is a newly retired cop, 30 years on the force. He has a couple gems that he has told me. Last one is pretty sad, so if you have any type of self-unalive tendencies, consider this a trigger warning. While working as a patrolman, he had a couple encounters with people high on PCP. The first was a lady who cut her entire anus out and ripped the inside part out. She woke up the next day with no recollection of what happened. She will have to be on a colostomy bag for the rest of her life. Another PCP story. Guy was butt naked in the middle of the road, sweating profusely. For those who don't know, PCP raises your body temp, so people get naked because they are hot. The guy used a broken glass bottle to cut his genitalia off, balls and everything. He ended up bleeding out before EMS arrived. Sad one. Thanksgiving morning, Dad worked a night shift and was home by 6 a.m. I came to the kitchen to help cook for Thanksgiving and see him staring off into space, something bothering him. Turns out there was a bad car accident and the car caught fire. The woman inside was stuck because her seatbelt had melted to her. Dad went to pull her out and described how her skin had just crisped over, so when he pulled on her to free her, the skin just kind of peeled off. They eventually got her out, but she had suffered severe burns and was permanently disfigured. Dad ended up getting burned up pretty good too on his arms. She ended up surviving, but took her life about 6 months later. That one my dad couldn't really ever shake. I think he blames himself for not getting her out sooner. That kind of heartache comes with the job, I suppose. Anyway, those are some memorable stories. He's got tons more, but those 3 come to mind right away. Reply 1. Note to self, never do PCP. Reply 2. Yeah, I don't know what makes you want to rip your own asshole out, but I think I can go through life not knowing and be okay. Reply 3. I don't understand the logic behind this at all. My mind is going crazy just trying to figure out what the hell that drug could make you think. Story 13. Former paramedic. Known former gang member and seriously bad dude who was suffering from epilepsy. It was known that when he was postictal, after the seizure, he would revert to his gangland days, and anyone in uniform he wanted to fight. Hey, look, ambulance drivers wear uniforms. Got a call to his known address. Me and my partner are first to arrive on scene. I already had the Valium and Versed drawn up and was ready to hit him with a knock you the duck out dose. As I got to the door, his mother, a very sweet lady, was hollering he's coming too. I jumped on of him and with all of my might held him down and rode him like I was on the Pro Bowl riding rodeo tour. My partner was able to get the meds into him, IM, which takes longer to work than IV, so I had to do that for the next 5 to 7 men till fire showed up. I was exhausted and not really wanting to get my ass beat, rode that bull till 5 more guys took over. I rolled off and was just done. 3 hours later, I ended up back at the hospital and he was in there. He apologized, always did, and said he never fought with anyone as tough as me. Thank God for being 40 heavier and a pocket full of mind-altering drugs. Story 14. As a rookie, I was responding to an alarm at restaurant that was supposed to be haunted by a woman. The first officer that arrived was an older officer that didn't do much, and he didn't ever get excited on the radio. As soon as he arrived, he asked for a second unit in a high-pitched tone. As I pulled in, he had his shotgun out and was leaned up over his hood. My first thought was, oh shit, someone is breaking in. When I ran up to him and asked what up, all he said was, as he pulled up and his lights hit the building, a woman jumped off the roof and disappeared. He was clearly shook. Me and another officer checked the building and found no evidence that someone had been there. It made an impression on me, and I never went back to the restaurant at night without another officer. Reply 1. Man, it's gotta be so ducking boring being a ghost. You only get to scare the shit out of people every once in a while, and all the rest of the time you're invisible, just watching people eat food you'll never be able to taste again. Poor ghost lady. Reply 2. One of my BFFs and I have a pact that whoever passes first has to haunt the other, but in a cool way. I try out a new outfit, her ghost floats a mirror in front of me. Maybe she uses her ghost breath and a finger to write a message on the mirror like, no. She's dating a guy that's bad for her. Ghost me pulls the chair out from under him just as he's trying to sit down at a fancy restaurant. So on and so forth. Story 15. Not me, but a guy I know. Very junior cop. He has been on the police force maybe 5 years now. On his very first call ever, he responded to an unalive herself incident. When he arrived, he found a 16-year-old teenage girl who had opted to end her life by slitting her own throat. First and foremost, I can't imagine what brought the girl to do this, extremely tragic. But I also can't fathom the mental strength required to be able to continue a career in the police force after kicking things off like that. Certainly demands respect for these individuals that serve. Story 16. My cousin was an EMT in Buffalo when he was backing up a SWAT insertion. As he tells it, the oh shit moment was when he realized the gunfire he was hearing wasn't from the police. Story 17. I was cleaning out a drug take-back box by my office one time. It's a metal box where people throw their old prescriptions so we can dispose of them properly. Usually people throw all manner of mundane items, sunscreen, vitamins, etc., but you run into a few opioids. On this evening, I reached into the box and felt a prick on my finger and saw an uncapped syringe. My heart dropped, and I went to the bathroom and started squeezing blood out of the pinprick. With shaky hands, I called my dispatch and asked them to send a paramedic to the office. The medic came and consulted me with the on-call doctor before she told me the chance of contracting something was very slim. I took a closer look at the syringe and saw it was someone's testosterone supplement, and it had the patient's name as well as the VA hospital name. I called down to the hospital, and thankfully the guy had no communicable diseases. Sure freaked me out though. Story 18. When I was responding to a simple trespass after warning call, and upon me making contact with the trespassed individual, he charged myself and my zone partner with a pair of scissors. Story 19. For unattended deaths in my town, law enforcement is typically called in to make sure there's nothing suspicious going on before EMS, coroner, funeral home take over. One day in the dead of summer, when it had been in the 90s for a full week, we got a call about an unattended death. We get there and go into the front door, and instantly we know by the smell that this guy has been here a while, and the AC is not running. It's easily 90 degrees downstairs, but he's upstairs. He is normally a pretty big guy. Stats from DMV said something like 350 pounds, if I remember correctly, but he was ballooned up from the heat and decomposition and reminded me of a gray Violet Beauregard from Willy Wonka. As they're trying to get him into the body bag, the skin starts slipping. Juices start oozing. The smell gets exponentially worse. That's about the point my sergeant decided we could wait until after the body was loaded to go back in. The image of that guy literally falling apart in the EMT's hands is something that will never leave me. Story 20. Responded to a welfare check called in by Social Services Hotline. A male had called in and said he wanted to unalive himself. They provided a name for the male and the number he called in on. Our dispatch was able to find a previous call from that number and the address linked to it. My partner and I responded to that address, and the father answered the door. We explained why we're there and asked to speak to his son. The father knocked on the son's locked door while we spoke in the hallway. I asked if he was getting dressed, and we knocked again. Immediately after, we heard the distinct sound of a handgun slide racking. We drew our handguns and told Dad to go outside immediately. While attempting to get Mom to go outside, she tried to walk down the hallway to Son's door, and I had to force her out of the residence. My partner and I both took cover inside the residence and gave commands to put the gun down, telling him we just came to check on him and to talk. 30 to 45 seconds into the whole ordeal, a single gunshot rang out from inside the bedroom. It was clear to us that he probably had shot himself. 1 to 2 minutes passed, and we had 2 additional officers on scene and were able to force entry into room and found the man immediately inside the doorway, single gunshot wound to the head. He was beyond helping. It was surreal telling the mom and dad their son was dead. It didn't faze the father at all. Inside his room were other spent handgun shells and holes in the wall from where he had shot the walls previously. He also had steak knives stabbed into the drywall. It was clear their son was disturbed and needed help, and I have no idea why the family did not seek out advice on what to do. Story 21. When I was a trainee, we were waiting for a suspected car thief, as far as I know from the info we got from local police anyway. When he shows up and we get him stopped, we have officers approach from behind. Well, here I come with a shotgun and take up a position on the passenger side, thinking I'm being tactical by covering this angle. Well, instead of doing a textbook felony stop, which would involve taking a defensive position and ordering him to come to us with his hands up, these officers just approach the stolen vehicle from the driver's side and order him out at gunpoint. My oh shit moment was when I realized I was downrange of all these pistols and rifles, essentially looking down their barrels. To this day, I don't know if I'm dumb for being the one guy on the passenger side, or if these officers are dumb for not doing a standard felony extraction. Luckily, the guy came quietly. Story 22. When I was a corrections officer, I got assigned to shadow an experienced officer until an FTO would be available to train me. It didn't take me long to find out that this CO was highly unpopular among the inmates. My moment was when we went into a 50-man dorm to do a roster bed check, and there was absolute silence in the dorm, and I could feel the hair standing on the back of my neck. The inmates were intently staring at the officer I was shadowing. He was oblivious to it, while I was straight up in a fight-or-flight mode. Never experienced that in a dorm after that. I feel like something serious was potentially going to go down that night. 2 on 50 is not good odds. I couldn't have been happier when I didn't have to shadow that guy anymore. Story 23. My husband got a call for a psychiatric emergency when working as an EMT. A kid on a four-wheeler saw a pickup crashed into a stone wall in a field and called the police, who called EMS. Apparently, the driver had driven into the wall intentionally and stabbed himself in the abdomen as well, and then bled to death or died of head injuries until someone found him. As my so was leaning in to turn off the engine, the truck ran out of gas. That was the weirdest one he's told me. Story 24. Not a cop, but an animal control officer. Got a call about a family dog that had been attacked an hour ago by something wild. Got there to find said family's dog's skin rotting off, with most of it gone and complete with maggots due to massive infection. Later found out it was from either chemical burn or boiling water poured on a dog. 2 weeks ago. Dog was taken to ER and euthed immediately due to only viable skin was skin on dog's head. Family still insisted it was a wild animal and it happened that night. I have no faith in humanity. Story 25. Actually, another one, which is a bit creepy too. Wrote a guy a DUI one night, towed his car and seized his license, serving him with the form from the DMV which says that his license has been seized and that he has to show up to a hearing to determine whether the license will be suspended. Like any good form, the DMV form has boxes where I fill out this guy's information and carbon copies so I can keep a copy with the report. A few days later, a buddy of mine finds me. He got dispatched to a call of an unalive attempt in the park. Man was found hanging from a tree. They identified him by the DMV form I had served him with, which was still in his pocket. Story 26. I think this counts. About 9 years ago, we get a call from a payphone. There's a dead body in the abandoned building at corner 1st and Main, street names made up for this story. An officer responds to the area and can't find anything that would be considered an abandoned building. The caller hung up without leaving any information, and the payphone that he called from was several miles from that area, so the officer clears out the call having no contact. The next day, we get another phone call from another payphone. There's a dead body inside the abandoned building at the corner of 1st and Main. Again, they hang up without offering any other information. This time, I get dispatched the report. I head up to the area of that intersection and start looking around. Now understand that I live and work in a fairly sizable metropolitan area, and this was when the economy was still good, booming even. Abandoned buildings were hard to come by at that time. I drive through all the shopping plaza is a little industrial complexes within the vicinity of that intersection, and I can't come up with anything. So I start driving a little bit further in each direction. But I remember that there's some new construction that hasn't been finished yet, and I wonder if they think that those are considered abandoned. I get out of my car and walk through a bunch of businesses that are still in the framing stages, but I can't find anything. As I leave the area, I'm now more than a mile from the original call location. As I pull out onto the major roadway, I stop for traffic and look in front of me. There it is, a gigantic electrical component factory that has been vacant for probably the last 15 years. It has a 9-foot wall around the entire perimeter, and the landscaping is still maintained, so it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb right away. That added to the fact that I'm pretty far away from where the caller said it should be, but then again, it's abandoned. It's definitely abandoned and has been there for a very long time, so I call for another unit to back me up, and we go check it out. We use a drainage pipe to climb up and over the 9-foot wall to get inside the perimeter. We start walking the building, checking every single door. When I say this place is big, I mean it's ducking huge. It's over 100,000 feet squared. It's like an old abandoned Motorola or Freescale or Intel type building. It has gigantic coolers on the outside, pipes running all over which way, ductwork running down the sides of the buildings, loading docks, and a basement. Every door we come across is locked and secured. We continue walking around looking for anything out of place. As I get about 3/4 of the way around the building, I pull on a door and it flings open. I call my backup, who comes over to me. We knock, announce, and enter the building. As we step into a hallway that leads about 100 yards down with doors on either side, the door we just stepped into closes, and it's black, pitch black, like can't see my ducking nose on my face black. We start moving through the building, trying to clear each room as the best of the two of us can. But this place is absolutely gigantic, and each room is connected to what seems like 4 other rooms. We stepped into one room, and the door closes behind us. It must have been some old clean room or something. It was the weirdest thing because there was no sound. Nothing. I couldn't hear the traffic outside, or the grumble of electricity or air moving. All the sounds that we heard throughout the rest of the building were gone in this one room. When I spoke to my partner, our voices didn't even echo. It must have had some kind of sound-canceling insulation or something, but it freaked me the duck out. The floor had random 12-inch holes in it that led down to a basement that was flooded by over 6 feet of water. Wire, ceiling panels, and wire jacketing were hanging from the ceiling. There was broken glass, broken pieces of metal and brick, holes in the drywall, and abandoned equipment all over. I clearly remember thinking to myself that if there was ever a time that I would be attacked by skinless zombie dogs, this would be it. And the entire time we are trying to find a dead body. As though this shit wasn't freaky enough, I'm actively looking for a dead guy. We end up moving through the building, clearing it as best we can until we get to what was definitely the industrial part of the building. Gigantic boilers, evaporative coolers, and components that run the building. Oh, and spiders. A shit ton of spiders. We stepped into a room and find that it is a dead end. We've reached the end of the building and we don't have any further to go. The room is about 20 by 30 feet and contains 5 very large electrical cabinets. They are about 8 feet tall and each about 4 feet wide, sitting next to each other. And they look exactly how I would design the lab of an evil genius if I had to make a sci-fi movie. The entire thing was covered in dials, levers, and red and green buttons. But only the panel in the middle was still illuminated. It had one steady glowing red light on it. The first and only light I saw in that entire building. My partner calls out to me, "You got anything?" I replied, "No, nothing in here. Looks like this was a gigantic waste of time. Just let me take a look behind these cabinets and we'll be good to head back to our cars." The panels have about 18 to 24 inches of room on each end between them and the wall behind them. I walk over to the left side and peek my head around. And bam, there he is. A ducking dead guy on the ground, pinned between the wall and the cabinet. He's on his back, arms in front of his chest like a T-Rex, and he has some injuries. And I nearly shot him. Not gonna lie, he scared the living shit out of me. Even though I spent the last hour actively looking for him, I still wasn't completely ready for it. So skip ahead to calling detectives, etc. At the time, stripping copper was fairly new, at least to our area. I didn't recognize what the wire jacketing meant, as I hadn't seen it before. These two knuckleheads in breaking into this abandoned factory for God knows how long and systematically stripping every piece of metal out of it. And they made it all the way to the very last room, the only room that still had power running to it. See, the middle panel, you controlled the fire suppression system for the building, and the owner's insurance policy required that it remained on active. When these guys opened up the panels, they must have thought they hit the mother lode. Each one contained an 1.5-inch copper cable. Now, an 1.5-inch copper cable is worth quite a bit of money, but it also conducts quite a bit of electricity. They cut through the first one successfully, leaving the sharp ends exposed inside the cabinet. But when this poor sap started cutting into the second one, he got the ride of his lifetime. Not only did he electrocute himself, but the current coursing through his arms pulled him into the cabinet, stabbing one of the exposed ends of the previous cable into his chest. This kills the copper thief. Story 27. Worked with a guy who used to work for Long Beach PD. Told me a story about a call coming in that some old man had threatened his neighbor for knocking down his fence. Friend gets on scene a little later, and 2 other units had already showed up. Friend sees crazy old guy cuffed and in the back of one of the cars already. He thinks, okay, these guys got this, and just wants to make sure the first units are okay. He walks up to one of the cops and notices that he has this oh shit look on his face. Cop says to friend, "Come with me, you have to see this shit." My friend follows the other officer into crazy old guy's garage through the house. His exact words when he told me this story was, "It was like that scene in Boondock Saints where they buy the guns." The crazy old man apparently had been stockpiling weapons for the last 20 years. Multiple rifles, shotguns, pipe bombs, Semtex, various pistols, and the Throne, a gas-powered lawnmower that had 2 M60s mounted on it. Controls for both weapons, ammo cans, etc. I'm not sure what else was on the Throne, lol. Story 28. I was running a road crew cleanup one day, and I had 8 state inmates. And one of them picks up a loaded .38 and starts walking back towards the van. I see the gun in his hand and say, "Oh duck, they fixing to shoot my ass." I made a cell phone call and left it on speaker and told the inmate to place it on the ground and back up. He said, "Boss, I ain't gonna shoot you. You too good to all of us." And he handed me the gun. We all loaded up and went back to the prison. I'm retired from the State of Florida Department of Corrections. Story 29. I was a cop for 2 years in Singapore. I wanted action and adventure. Singapore being one of the safest countries in the world, I arrested no one. Oh shit. So much for adventure. Story 30. I'm not an officer, but my friend's dad was. He got a call that there was an unalive incident at a residence, and he didn't find out until he drove over that it was the guy's daughter's 5th birthday. He got drunk with the other dads, and they decided to play Russian roulette with a 1911. Reply. For those unaware, a 1911 is a semi-automatic pistol with a standard single-stack magazine. You need a revolver with a rotating cylinder to play Russian roulette because there is a 1 in 6 chance of getting shot if you only load one round into a revolver. But there's a 100% chance of getting shot if you use a semi-auto due to the significant design differences. Story 31. My cousin is an RCMP officer. His first posting was in northern Saskatchewan community near the Northwest Territories. His first call was for a domestic dispute. The oh shit moment happened when they pulled up to the house. The door was open and there was blood everywhere. They entered the house to find 2 men arguing over a deer they killed and who would get the bigger half. Story 32. Former paramedic here. I responded to a crash on the highway that required extrication of the driver. I hop in the back seat and hold C-spine as fire starts taking off the door, cutting posts, etc. The driver starts asking where Molly and Fred are and if they're okay. I'm confused because she was the only occupant of the car. I ask her if she's talking about the other car, and she says, no, they're my pet tarantula and snake. I look in the floorboard, and there are the remains of 2 terrariums, but no Molly or Fred. Story 33. I was watching over a guy at the hospital, and all of a sudden it looks like he was fingering his asshole. He then proceeds to jack off. My partner and I go in with nurses, and we tell the guy to show us his hands. He pulls out one hand, and it was fine. We tell him to bring out the other hand slowly, and it was just covered in shit. The nurses get him cleaned up, and maybe half an hour later, he starts doing it again. This time, we somewhat stop him in time. I asked him if he needed to go to the bathroom, to which he nodded. I retrieved a nurse, and they started walking to the bathroom. This man held his finger in his butthole the whole way to the bathroom, but that wasn't enough of a plug, so he started dropping little Hershey kisses of poops. It was later decided that he needed to go to a mental facility. P.S. He had told us he had gotten rid of a gun earlier, so that then sent a couple of our guys on a wild goose chase to find it, which they did. Story 34. I've only heard a few stories from my dad. He's been a police officer for 27 years now, and there's 2 that I can distinctly remember. Trigger warning, child death and self-unalivement. Finding newborn twins in a dumpster outside of a restaurant. Don't recall if they were still alive or not. Get called to a woman standing on the edge of a building. Dad and partner get to the roof to try to talk to her, but she jumps off when she sees them. Not long after, they find she had thrown her 2 kids off. Unfortunately, they did not make it. Story 35. Paramedic here, not an officer, but I probably know this one officer's oh shit moment. Went on a psychiatric call out in the rural area of our zone. Ended up being a hanging. Super eerie vibe. It was dusk out, cool fall breeze, remote house with a single tree in front of it, and nothing around for miles. House had a very long, very steep driveway. As you drive up, you see the silhouette of a man hanging from the tree. Looked like a Halloween decoration. I was first on scene and advised our dispatch of what I had. We used separate dispatches from the sheriff's department, and he hadn't received the update yet. He rolls up and quite literally says, Jesus ducking Christ. Rookie deputy. He's actually a good friend of mine. One of the things I would never, ever recommend one to see in person. So surreal, lifeless body just swaying in the wind. Story 36. Not my own story, but I used to work with a guy who was in the police but hit burnout after seeing a lot of shit and jumped careers. He told me a story where he got a call about an apparent dead body in the underground. Some teenage girl had OD'd on the train, but because she was propped up in her seat, nobody noticed she was dead. She's been riding around the train's route for hours, and because of how impersonal we are as a society, nobody even looked in her direction and noticed she was quite clearly dead. He saw the security footage from the train and described it as like something out of a horror movie. Playing through the footage and seeing people coming on and coming off the train and fast forward, winking in and out of the shot, while she just sat there completely motionless as the clock zoomed through hours of video, and nobody realizing they were sharing the carriage with a corpse.